We're going to have a little preview of our Parsha. So this morning, along with Jewish communities all over the world, we read the traditional Rosh Hashanah first day Torah portion, chapter 21 of Genesis. The story begins happily enough with the miraculous birth of Isaac to his elderly parents, Abraham and Sarah. But quickly things get messy. Where you see there was a backstory in chapter 16, and there's a ringing that I'm hearing on the microphones. I don't know if you're hearing it, but I'm hearing it. Hopefully not too disturbing. It's these ones. All right, carry on. So chapter 16 of Genesis, years earlier, in desperation, Sarah had given her servant Hagar to Abraham as a wife in order to produce children. But when Hagar conceived, she began to disdain Sarah. Sarah lashed out, either verbally or perhaps even physically abusing her. We don't know exactly. The text just says that she oppressed Hagar. And Hagar ran away until an angel of God convinced her to return and submit to the harsh treatment with the promise that her coming child would eventually be a great nation. By chapter 21 in today's reading, that child, Ishmael, is a teen when his brother Isaac is born to Sarah. On the day of Isaac's weaning, a few years later, Sarah sees Ishmael mitzachek. Now that's an ambiguous word in Hebrew. It could mean anything from the innocent play of children to some kind of sexual misconduct. Whatever's going on, Sarah sees it and demands that Abraham cast out Hagar and Ishmael. And though the thing seems terrible in his eyes, Abraham does it. He casts out Hagar and his own son, Ishmael, into the wilderness. Soon they run out of water, and Hagar abandons Ishmael under a bush, not wanting to see him die. We'll read what happens next when we chant from the scroll in a few minutes. But right now, I want to pause and ask a sort of meta question. Why are we reading this story today? Why did our ancestors assign us to read this particular section of Torah on Rosh Hashanah every year? The most disappointing answer I found as I looked through commentaries was this one from a text called Peninei Halacha, which says, despite the pain it caused, the banishment of Ishmael was not in any way immoral. Had it been, the sages would not have ordained its reading on Rosh Hashanah, as they would not have wanted to provide the accusers with material. According to this source, it would be unthinkable that the rabbis of old would remind God on the day of judgment that our ancestors made mistakes. The implication is that if something our ancestors did appears to be a sin, our job is to ignore the evidence and the moral voice of our own hearts and explain why it's not really a sin. This turns out to be a common rabbinic response to the story of Sarah and Abraham and Ishmael and Hagar. Among many rabbis over the ages, it takes many forms. Some blame the victim, accusing Ishmael of idolatry, attempted murder, and child molestation. Others criticize Hagar for stepping away when she didn't think she could stand to watch her son die of thirst. Somehow, the logic seems to be Hagar and Ishmael deserved what they got. Sarah and Abraham had a good reason for doing what would otherwise seem a terrible thing to do. These commentators, like some kind of self-preserving ego, radically reread the story in order to feel better about Sarah and Abraham. It's understandable. We all do it. Even more so when it's our own lives and not just a story. getting defensive, making excuses, casting blame, anything, so as not to have to face the truth. I made a mistake. I did something wrong. I was selfish. I hurt someone. I failed. Torah implies that this tendency is deep in human nature, starting with the very first human beings. When God comes looking for Adam and Eve after they taste the forbidden fruit, the divine voice calls out, Ayeka, where are you? Now, surely God is not asking for Adam and Eve to reveal their GPS coordinates. Of course, God knows where they are. Rather, Ayeka is a call for Adam and Eve to consider where they are morally speaking. It's a chance for them to admit their mistake and come clean. But they don't. First they hide, and then when the inevitable conversation unfolds, it's nothing but finger pointing. Adam blames Eve, Eve blames the snake. The snake doesn't have any fingers to point. It would be nice to think that since then, humans have evolved our way out of this pattern of dodging responsibility, but no. Just tune in to the latest sound bites on the evening news. There is a particular form of deflection that seems to be very popular right now, whataboutism. Yes, it's actually, if you can search it up on Google, whataboutism. It goes something like this. Person A does a bad thing. Person B calls it out. Person A deflects, not by denying or blaming exactly, but by accusing someone else. Person C of wrongdoing, perhaps even wrongdoing that is similar in some way. I'll give you a purely imaginary example that would definitely never happen in my household, okay? I walk into the kitchen, my eldest son, please forgive me, Adam, is sitting there playing video games when he should be doing homework. I did check with him, and it is okay with him that I'm telling you this story. Adam, I say, you are supposed to be doing homework. What about Daniel? He replies, he's over there playing video games. Now, does Daniel playing video games make it okay for Adam to be ignoring his homework? No. Thank you. Maybe you could say, this is a justice issue. Why am I enforcing rules for one sibling and not the other? But if I engage in that discussion, which may or may not have merit, I've already taken my eye off the ball. Deflection achieved. Now we are talking about whether the rules are evenly applied. We're debating about how similar or different these cases may be. We're talking about Daniel. We are no longer just talking about whether Adam should be doing his homework. It works in politics too. In fact, whataboutism is an old propaganda technique famously associated with the USSR and now Russia. By drawing false equivalencies, whataboutism erodes our ability to make distinctions or hold anybody to account. But wait, I can hear your thought bubbles. They are saying, you say that's a Soviet thing, but what about us in the US right now? Yes! What about the whataboutism going on right here, right now? Unfortunately, we seem not to be immune. As Aaron Blake recently wrote in the Washington Post, whataboutism has infected our politics like few things have. If you pay attention to this pattern, you'll start to see it everywhere. And don't let it fool you. The last few years have trained me well to spot and bring skepticism to these kind of deflections. Maybe that's why I found it particularly disturbing when I saw those rabbis whatabouting to defend Sarah and Abraham in today's story. You say Sarah was cruel? What about Hagar? What about Ishmael? It may look like Sarah and Abraham did something immoral, but what about those things we think Ishmael did? Rather than grappling with the possibility that Sarah wronged Hagar, which is what a straightforward reading tells us, these commentaries defend her at almost all cost, even to the point of distorting the apparent facts of the case, and worse, ignoring the voice of the conscience telling us Sarah and Abraham did something wrong. When we read this story at this time of year, a time when our entire spiritual practice asks us to face the mistakes we have made, this defensive strategy seems particularly misguided. If we cannot even admit that our mistakes are mistakes, how will we ever hope to overcome them? If we read the stories of the past, and here I mean biblical past, personal past, political past, if we read them as if our job is to justify and make excuses for the good guys, we will be doomed to repeat those errors over and over again. Thankfully, there are rabbis willing to grapple with the apparent sins of even our dearest ancestors. The one I most appreciate is the commentary of Rabbi David Kimchi, known as Radak, who wrote in the 12th and 13th century in France. He condemns Sarah's treatment of Hagar, saying, Sarah did not behave morally or piously in this. What Sarah did was not pleasing in the eyes of God. Instead of finding Sarah's mistakes to be threatening, Radak ultimately finds them to be redemptive for us, if we can read the text honestly. He writes, the reason that this story was written in the Torah was in order that a person can acquire from it good character traits, midot, and distance from the bad ones. In order to learn the right lesson from this text, Radak suggests that we have to admit Sarah's error. But how can that be? Isn't she our role model? Radak here demands a much more sophisticated reading than our earlier text, one that develops our moral sensibility by doing a few things. First, his reading encourages us to look at the evidence honestly, even if it paints the good guy in a negative light. By holding Sarah accountable for her behavior, we strengthen our ability to do the same when we consider our own behavior. Instead of exercising our capacity to make excuses, we strengthen our ability to face hard truths. This is a critical step in the process of teshuvah, repentance, at the heart of our High Holy Day season. Second, Radak presumes a worldview of complexity and nuance, which helps us to navigate the real world far more than simple black and white thinking. To say that Abraham and Sarah made mistakes is not to say that they are bad people or that they're unworthy of being role models. It can be disappointing, like the heartbreak of a child who comes to realize that her parents aren't perfect and all-powerful. It is disappointing to think of Sarah giving in to her jealousy, sending her rival to die in the desert. It's disappointing to think of Abraham casting out his own son. I confess there's a part of me that wants my heroes to be perfect, my decisions to be easy, my path to be straight, and I long to think of myself as morally infallible. But there's a problem with that approach. And I'd sum up the problem with one word: reality. In real life, good guys do make mistakes. And sometimes we can only learn the important things in life by messing up. In real life, our friends and family may hurt us sometimes, even though they love us. In real life, even powerful, freedom-loving democracies can make immoral decisions and do horrendous things. And we do better to admit it. We desperately need to admit it. When we admit the complexity of our world and our past, we make wiser decisions, we learn from our mistakes, and we open the door to reconciliation. Even more than that, when we allow our heroes to be human, we allow ourselves to be heroes. I'll say that one more time. When we allow our heroes to be human, we allow ourselves to be heroes. So I say yes, Abraham did lack a moral backbone on occasion, and Sarah mistreated Hagar. Let us not make excuses. It's not our job to make these people perfect. And in fact, when we whitewash our ancestors or our history, we risk far worse than merely having to deal with imperfect heroes. We risk losing the ability to discern right from wrong. So what can we learn from Sarah's mistake, from Abraham's? Don't have two wives. Well, yes, that's one lesson. And also this: jealousy can drive even the greatest of people to do terrible things. Love can make a person tolerate and even enable those terrible things. And perhaps at this season, the most important lesson: a flawed person can still be a great person. By the end of our reading this morning, God intervenes. I didn't want to leave you hanging, really. A miraculous spring bubbles up and sustains Hagar and Ishmael in the wilderness. Later on in the Torah, after Sarah dies, there are clues that Abraham, Hagar, Ishmael, and Isaac may have reconnected and reconciled. There's Midrash, rabbinic legend, that even says when Abraham marries Keturah after Sarah dies, that Keturah is Hagar. And Ishmael and Isaac come together to bury Abraham when he dies. And there are other midrashim, I'll teach it one day, about the possibilities that opens in our imagination. This possibility becomes all the more meaningful if we acknowledge the depth of harm and pain in today's episode. Some relationships may never mend in one lifetime, yet human beings are resilient, and healing after harm is also a part of the complexity of the real world. As we reflect on our own mistakes in this season of turning, may we be blessed with the courage to face our failings, to learn from them, and to grow. May we be unfooled by the deflections and excuses in our world and in ourselves that would deny responsibility and confuse our moral compass. And may this year be a year of health, kindness, and healing for ourselves and those we love, and even for those we don't. Amen.